In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death lurks behind every rock and trust is the only currency that matters, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell had built her reputation on one simple principle. She never left anyone behind. Her SEAL team knew this. The enemy knew this. Even the brass back in Washington knew this. So when her encrypted radio went silent during Operation Blackwater, when her GPS beacon vanished from their screens like a ghost dissolving into morning mist, and when 48 hours passed without a single word from the woman who had led them through hell and back 17 times before, her team faced an impossible reality. Their unbreakable commander was gone. But in a world where the impossible happens every day, where warriors are forged in fire and legends are born from blood, sometimes the dead refuse to stay buried. Sometimes, when all hope is lost and the darkness seems absolute, a shadow moves in the distance. Sometimes, just sometimes, the hunter becomes the hunted, and the prey reveals itself to be the predator. The SEALs believed their commander was lost forever. They were about to discover they were dead wrong. The morning sun cast long shadows across the forward operating base as Petty Officer First Class Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez checked his gear for the 15th time. His calloused hands moved with practiced precision, each piece of equipment finding its designated place with the muscle memory of a man who had done this dance too many times to count. The weight of his rifle felt familiar against his shoulder, a comfort in a world where comfort was a luxury few could afford. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the landing zone, her silhouette sharp against the pale Afghan sky. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her uniform through blood, sweat, and an unwavering determination that had become legendary among her peers. Her team called her Ghost, not because she was hard to see, but because she had an uncanny ability to appear exactly where she was needed most, when she was needed most. "Listen up," she said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her, each belonging to a warrior who would follow her into the gates of hell without question. "Intelligence indicates our target is holed up in a compound approximately 12 clicks northeast of our current position. We go in fast, we go in quiet, and we come home together." The mission briefing was routine, but Tank noticed the way Mitchell's jaw tightened when she mentioned the target. Ahmed Qasim wasn't just another high-value asset. He was the ghost behind 3 IED attacks that had claimed the lives of 14 American soldiers in the past month. Personal vendettas had no place in military operations, but Tank knew his commander well enough to see the fire burning behind her steel-gray eyes. Senior Chief Alex Prophet Thompson adjusted his communications gear and ran through the radio checks one final time. At 28, he was the youngest senior chief in SEAL Team 6, a distinction that came with both respect and responsibility. His ability to maintain communications in the most hostile environments had saved their lives more times than any of them could count. "Comms check, all stations." Prophet's voice crackled through their earpieces. One by one, each team member confirmed their equipment was operational. Mitchell's voice came through last, clear and steady. "Raven 1, good copy." The helicopter's rotors began their familiar whoop-whoop rhythm, drowning out all other sounds. Mitchell gave the hand signal, and her team moved with the synchronized precision of a Swiss watch. Each man knew his role, knew his position, knew that their survival depended on the 6 warriors around him. As the aircraft lifted off, Tank watched the base shrink below them. The mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. Somewhere in those unforgiving peaks, Ahmed Qasim believed he was safe. The thought brought a grim smile to Tank's face. In 6 hours, Qasim would learn the difference between believing and knowing. The flight to the drop zone passed in relative silence, each team member lost in his own pre-mission ritual. Petty Officer Second Class James "Spider" Williams cleaned his sniper rifle with an almost religious devotion, his movements slow and deliberate. The weapon in his hands could put a bullet through a target's eye from 800 meters away, and Spider treated it with the respect such precision demanded. Petty Officer Second Class David "Torch" Martinez checked his explosive charges, each device carefully calibrated for maximum effect with minimal collateral damage. His expertise with demolitions had opened more doors than a master locksmith, though his methods were considerably more dramatic. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to LZ. Mitchell stood, her movement fluid despite the aircraft's vibrations. "Remember, this isn't just about Qasim. Intelligence suggests he's in possession of detailed information about planned attacks on coalition forces. We need him alive if possible, but the mission comes first. Everyone goes home. The helicopter began its descent toward a rocky outcrop that would provide concealment from prying eyes. Tank felt the familiar pre-mission adrenaline surge through his veins, sharpening his senses and flooding his muscles with energy. This was what he had trained for, what he lived for. The aircraft touched down with barely a whisper, a testament to the pilot's skill. Mitchell was the first one out, her boots hitting the rocky ground with practiced silence. Her team followed, moving like shadows across the landscape. The helicopter lifted off immediately, its fading rotor washed the only evidence it had ever been there. The compound lay hidden in a valley 12 kilometers away, a journey that would take them through some of the most treacherous terrain Afghanistan had to offer. Mitchell checked her GPS and pointed northeast. Without a word, her team fell into formation, each man maintaining the precise distance that would allow for maximum mobility while ensuring mutual support. The first hour passed without incident. They moved through narrow ravines and across exposed ridgelines, always aware that enemy eyes might be watching from concealed positions. Mitchell led from the front, reading the terrain like a book she had memorized, adjusting their route to take advantage of every piece of available cover. Prophet's voice whispered through their earpieces. Drone feed shows the compound is heavily fortified. Looks like our intelligence was accurate. Multiple fighting positions, reinforced walls, single point of entry. Mitchell raised her fist, bringing the team to an immediate halt. Through her scope, she could see the compound nestled against the base of a cliff face. The position was well chosen, offering excellent defensive advantages while limiting approach routes. Getting inside wouldn't be impossible, but it would require careful planning and flawless execution. "Spider, can you get a clean shot on the sentries?" she whispered into her microphone. Spider's response came back immediately. "Affirmative." 2 tangos visible, both armed with AK-47s. Range approximately 400 meters. "Wait for my signal." Mitchell studied the compound through her binoculars, noting every detail, every potential weakness. Years of experience had taught her that the first 30 seconds of any operation were the most critical. Once they committed, there would be no turning back. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Spider would eliminate the sentries with precision shots, creating a window of opportunity for the team to breach the perimeter. Torch would disable the compound's generator, plunging the interior into darkness. Prophet would jam any communications equipment to prevent calls for reinforcement. Tank would lead the assault through the main entrance, while Mitchell coordinated the overall operation. All stations, this is Raven 1. Execute in 60 seconds. Tank checked his weapon one final time, ensuring a round was chambered and his safety was off. Beside him, the other team members made their final preparations. These were the moments that separated the elite from the ordinary, when split-second decisions could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. 30 seconds. Spider settled into his shooting position, his breathing slow and controlled. Through his scope, he could see the first sentry clearly, unaware that death was moments away. The second target was partially concealed but still within range. 2 shots, 2 kills, no room for error. 10 seconds. Mitchell felt the familiar calm that always preceded action. Her mind was clear, focused entirely on the task ahead. Every variable had been considered, every contingency planned for. In a few moments, they would either complete their mission or die trying. There was no middle ground. Execute. Spider's rifle whispered twice, the suppressor reducing the shots to barely audible pops. Both sentries dropped instantly, their bodies crumpling to the ground like discarded puppets. Torch moved immediately, his charges detonating against the compound's power lines with controlled precision. The lights inside went out, plunging the building into darkness. Prophet's equipment hummed to life, flooding the airwaves with white noise that would prevent any outgoing communications. Tank surged forward, his team moving like a pack of wolves scenting blood. The compound's single entrance loomed ahead, a narrow doorway that would funnel them into unknown danger. Mitchell coordinated the assault with surgical precision, her voice calm and steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Breach in 3, 2, 1. Torch's explosive charge blew the door inward, the concussion wave rattling windows throughout the compound. Tank was through the opening before the smoke cleared, his weapon trained on potential threats. The interior was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one potentially hiding armed enemies. They moved through the building methodically, clearing each room with practiced efficiency. The compound's occupants had been caught completely off guard, their defensive preparations useless against the speed and precision of the SEAL assault. Within minutes, the building was secure. But Ahmed Kasim was nowhere to be found. Mitchell stood in the compound's main room, studying intelligence documents scattered across a wooden table. Maps, photographs, and handwritten notes in Arabic painted a picture of planned attacks that would dwarf anything they had seen before. This wasn't just about revenge for fallen soldiers. Kasim was planning something that would change the entire nature of the conflict. "Commander, you need to see this." Prophet's voice carried an urgency that made Mitchell's blood run cold. She followed him to a back room where a sophisticated radio setup dominated one corner. The equipment was still warm, indicating recent use. "He knew we were coming," Prophet said quietly. "This gear was transmitting right up until we hit the power." Mitchell felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If Kasim had advance warning of their operation, it meant someone with access to classified intelligence was feeding him information. The implications were staggering. "How long ago did the transmission end?" she asked. "Maybe 5 minutes before we breached." 5 minutes. Kasim could be anywhere within a 5-mile radius, and that radius was expanding with every passing second. But Mitchell wasn't ready to admit defeat. Somewhere in these mountains, a terrorist was running for his life, believing he had escaped justice. He was about to learn that SEAL Team 6 didn't give up easily. She studied the maps on the radio table, noting marked positions and escape routes. One location was circled in red ink, a cave complex approximately 3 kilometers northeast of their current position. It was marked with Arabic script that Prophet quickly translated. "Safe house," he said grimly. "Looks like he's got a backup plan." Mitchell felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest. Kasim might have a head start, but she had something he didn't. The finest warriors the United States military had ever produced, and they weren't going home empty-handed. "Gather all intelligence materials," she ordered. "We're going hunting." The team moved with renewed purpose, collecting documents, hard drives, and anything else that might provide valuable intelligence. Tank found weapons caches hidden throughout the compound, enough firepower to arm a small militia. This operation was bigger than they had imagined. As they prepared to leave, Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling for extraction and letting conventional forces pursue Kasim, she chose to continue the hunt. Her team was already in position, already had the scent. Why give their prey time to escape when they could end this now? "Prophet, send a message to base. Tell them we're in pursuit of the primary target. Extraction delayed until mission complete." Prophet's fingers moved across his communications equipment, encoding the message that would buy them time to finish what they had started. Miles away, commanders would receive word that SEAL Team 6 was extending their operation. The standard procedure called for immediate extraction once the primary compound was secured, but Mitchell had never been one to follow standard procedure when lives were at stake. The cave complex lay hidden among jagged peaks that seemed to reach toward the sky like accusing fingers. Getting there would require crossing exposed terrain where they would be vulnerable to observation and attack. But Mitchell had built her reputation on accepting risks that others considered unacceptable. "We move in 10 minutes, she announced. "Travel light, move fast. Kasim thinks he's safe in his hole. Time to prove him wrong." As her team prepared for the next phase of their operation, none of them could have imagined that within hours, everything they thought they knew about their mission would be turned upside down. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and their unbreakable commander would face a test that would push her beyond every limit she thought she had. But that knowledge lay hidden in the future, as dark and unknowable as the mountain caves that awaited them. For now, there was only the mission, only the pursuit, only the unwavering determination to see justice done. Mitchell checked her weapon one final time and stepped out into the Afghan wilderness, leading her team toward a confrontation that would test them all in ways they could never have imagined. The Afghan sun climbed mercilessly toward its zenith as Mitchell led her team across the boulder-strewn landscape. Each step carried them deeper into hostile territory, further from the safety of their extraction point, closer to an enemy who knew these mountains like a poet knows his verses. The cave complex loomed ahead, its dark entrances yawning like hungry mouths in the cliff face. Tank wiped sweat from his forehead, tasting salt and grit. The thin mountain air burned his lungs with each breath, but he maintained his position in the formation, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. Behind him, Spider moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his rifle ready to reach out and touch anyone foolish enough to show themselves. Mitchell raised her fist, bringing the team to an immediate halt. Through her binoculars, she studied the cave entrances, counting at least 7 different openings carved into the rock face. Intelligence reports indicated the complex was extensive, with tunnels connecting multiple chambers deep within the mountain. Finding Kasim inside would be like hunting a specific grain of sand on an endless beach. "Prophet, any chatter on the frequencies?" she whispered into her microphone. "Negative, Commander. Radio silence across all monitored channels." The absence of communications was almost more troubling than intercepted transmissions would have been. It suggested either that Kasim wasn't here or that he was operating under strict communication discipline. Given his survival this long, Mitchell suspected the latter. Torch studied the cliff face through his scope, noting potential entry and exit points. The caves were positioned approximately 100 meters above the valley floor, accessible only through a narrow trail that switchbacked up the mountainside. Any approach would be exposed for significant periods, making them vulnerable to observation and attack. "Commander!" Spider's voice carried across the radio with quiet urgency. "I've got movement in the third cave from the left. Looks like a sentry." Mitchell adjusted her binoculars and focused on the indicated position. A figure moved briefly across the cave mouth, there for a moment, and then gone. But it was enough to confirm they were in the right place. "Looks like somebody's home," Tank murmured, checking his ammunition. The approach would require careful coordination. Spider would provide overwatch, his rifle trained on the visible cave entrances. Tank and Torch would lead the assault up the narrow trail, while Prophet maintained communications and provided tactical support. Mitchell would coordinate the overall operation while prepared to adapt to changing circumstances. "Remember, we need Kasim alive if possible," Mitchell reminded her team. "But if it comes down to him or us, we all go home." The climb began in deadly silence, each team member acutely aware that they were exposed targets moving across open ground. The trail was barely wide enough for single file, with sheer drops on one side and vertical rock on the other. One misstep could send a man tumbling hundreds of feet to his death. Halfway up the cliff face, Tank paused as loose rock skittered down from above. Someone was moving inside the caves, and they weren't being particularly careful about concealment. Either they felt secure in their defensive position, or they were deliberately making noise to mask other activities. Mitchell felt the familiar tingle of intuition that had kept her alive through countless operations. Something was wrong. The approach was too easy, the opposition too light. In her experience, when things seemed too simple, it usually meant she was walking into a trap. "Hold position," she commanded, studying the cave entrances through her scope. The movement Spider had detected earlier was gone, but she could sense watching eyes in the shadows. Every warrior developed a sixth sense about being observed, and hers was screaming warnings. Prophet's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Commander, I'm picking up electronic signatures from inside the mountain. Looks like sophisticated equipment, possibly including surveillance gear." The pieces began falling into place in Mitchell's mind. The ease of tracking Kasim to this location, the minimal security, the feeling of being watched. They weren't hunting their quarry so much as being led to him. The question was whether they were walking into a trap, or whether Kasim was making a desperate last stand in the only defensible position he could find. "Spider, can you get a thermal reading on the caves?" "Negative, Commander. Too much rock interference. But I'm seeing occasional movement in at least 3 different entrances." Multiple positions suggested either a larger force than intelligence had indicated, or a deliberate attempt to confuse attackers about the enemy's true location. Mitchell weighed their options, knowing that every minute they spent in discussion was another minute for Kasim to strengthen his defenses or call for reinforcement. "We go with the original plan," she decided, "but stay sharp. This feels like a setup." The final approach to the cave entrance required crossing 20 meters of exposed ground under the direct observation of multiple positions. It was exactly the kind of tactical nightmare that separated elite units from ordinary soldiers. Lesser warriors would have called for air support or artillery. Mitchell chose to trust in the training and skill of her team. Tank went first, moving in short rushes from one piece of cover to the next. His massive frame seemed to flow across the rocky terrain despite its bulk, each movement calculated to minimize exposure while maintaining momentum toward the objective. Torch followed, his demolition equipment secured to prevent any accidental detonations during movement. The first cave entrance yawned before them, a natural archway leading into absolute darkness. Tank paused at the threshold, allowing his eyes to adjust while listening for any sounds from within. The silence was complete, almost oppressive in its intensity. Mitchell joined them at the entrance, her weapon trained into the shadows. "Torch, give us some light." A flare arced into the cave, its brilliant white light revealing a chamber that extended far deeper into the mountain than any of them had expected. The walls were worked stone, carved with intricate patterns that spoke of centuries of use. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a fortress. They moved into the tunnel in standard formation, Mitchell taking point while Tank covered their rear. The passage sloped downward, leading them deeper into the heart of the mountain. Side passages branched off at regular intervals, creating a maze that could hide dozens of defenders. Prophet's voice echoed strangely in the enclosed space. "Commander, I'm reading multiple heat signatures ahead. Could be equipment, could be personnel." The tunnel opened into a large chamber carved from living rock. Ancient symbols covered the walls, and the air carried the musty scent of centuries. But what captured their attention were the modern additions: electronic equipment, weapons caches, and supplies that could sustain a significant force for weeks. Well, Tank muttered, studying the setup. Somebody's been busy. Mitchell examined the equipment more closely, noting sophisticated communications gear and what appeared to be surveillance monitors. Multiple screens showed views of the approaches to the cave complex, confirming her suspicion that they had been observed throughout their approach. A sound from deeper in the complex brought all weapons up instantly. Footsteps echoed from one of the side passages, deliberate and unhurried. Someone was approaching, and they weren't trying to hide their presence. Ahmed Kasim stepped into the chamber with his hands raised, but his expression held no fear. If anything, he looked satisfied, like a man who had successfully completed a difficult task. He was younger than Mitchell had expected, perhaps 35, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," he said in perfect English, "I have been waiting for you." The words sent ice through Mitchell's veins. He knew her name, knew her rank. That information wasn't contained in any intelligence reports that should have been accessible to someone in his position. It suggested a leak at the highest levels of military command. "Ahmed Kasim," she replied, her weapon trained on his chest. "You're under arrest for crimes against coalition forces." His smile was genuinely amused. "I think you will find that the situation is not quite as simple as you believe." Tank stepped forward, zip tie restraints ready. "Save the speeches for your interrogators." But Kasim made no move to resist. Instead, he gestured toward the electronic equipment surrounding them. "Please, examine the monitors more closely. I believe you will find them quite illuminating." Against her better judgment, Mitchell glanced at the screens. What she saw made her blood turn to ice water. The monitors didn't just show the approaches to the cave complex. They showed the positions of her team during their approach, their exact route, even their planned extraction point. Someone had been tracking their every movement since they left the forward operating base. "How?" was all she managed to say. "The same way I knew you would be at the compound this morning. The same way I knew exactly which route you would take to reach this location. The same way I know that in approximately 30 minutes, this entire mountain is going to become extremely unhospitable to American military personnel." Prophet's equipment suddenly crackled to life, intercepting radio transmissions in multiple languages. The voices were urgent, coordinated, and getting closer. Mitchell realized with growing horror that they hadn't been hunting Ahmed Kasim. They had been herded to this location for reasons she was only beginning to understand. "Commander," Spider's voice came through her earpiece with unmistakable urgency. "I've got movement on multiple approaches. Looks like at least 50 hostiles converging on our position." The trap was springing shut around them, but Mitchell's mind was already racing ahead to their options. The cave complex offered defensible positions, but they would be outnumbered at least 8-1. Their extraction point was compromised, their communications potentially monitored, and their enemy had demonstrated intelligence capabilities that suggested support from sources within the American command structure. "You have perhaps 10 minutes before the first assault teams reach this chamber," Kasim said conversationally. "I would suggest you use that time wisely." Mitchell's training kicked in, overriding the shock and confusion that threatened to paralyze her thinking. Regardless of how they had arrived at this situation, her responsibility was clear: get her team out alive. Everything else was secondary. "Prophet, can you raise base?" "Trying, Commander, but I'm getting interference on all frequencies." That confirmed what she had already suspected. Their communications were being jammed either by equipment in the cave complex or by hostile forces positioning themselves around the mountain. They were effectively cut off from outside support. Torch examined the cave entrances, calculating blast patterns and defensive positions. "I can seal most of the approaches, but we'll need to choose our exit route carefully. Once I blow the charges, we won't have many options." Tank studied their tactical situation with the calm professionalism of a man who had faced impossible odds before. "How many routes out of this place?" Kasim answered before Mitchell could speak. 7 entrances, but only 3 that connect to passages leading down the mountain. The others are dead ends or connect to chambers that flood during the rainy season. The casual way he offered tactical information confirmed Mitchell's growing suspicion that this entire situation was more complex than a simple capture mission gone wrong. Kasim wanted them to escape, but why? What purpose did their survival serve in whatever larger plan was unfolding? "Why help us?" she asked directly. "Because, Commander Mitchell, you and your team are far more valuable alive than dead, at least to certain interested parties." Before she could pursue that cryptic comment, Spider's voice crackled through their radio with desperate urgency. "Commander, they're not just positioning around the mountain, they're moving up the trails. We've got maybe 5 minutes before this place turns into a shooting gallery." Mitchell made the decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of trying to fight their way out through superior numbers, instead of attempting to call for extraction from a compromised position, she chose to trust her instincts and follow Kasim deeper into the cave complex. "Which passage?" she asked. Kasim pointed toward a narrow opening in the chamber's far wall. "That tunnel leads to a series of chambers that eventually connect to an exit on the mountain's north face. It's approximately a kilometer of underground travel, but it will place you well beyond the current encirclement." "And you?" "I will be staying here to have a conversation with my associates. There are certain matters that require clarification." The sound of approaching voices echoed through the tunnels, growing closer with each passing second. Mitchell realized that whatever was happening here was far larger than her mission to capture one terrorist. She was a piece in a game she didn't understand, being moved by players whose identities remained hidden in shadows. But understanding could wait. Right now, survival was the only priority that mattered. "Move," she commanded, and her team flowed toward the indicated passage, like water finding the path of least resistance. Behind them, Ahmed Kasim settled into a chair facing the main entrance, apparently content to await whatever fate had in store for him. The narrow tunnel forced them into single file, their progress slowed by the need to navigate obstacles in near-complete darkness. Prophet's equipment provided the only illumination, casting eerie shadows that danced on the carved walls. The passage sloped downward at first, then began a gradual climb toward what Kasim had promised would be their salvation. "Commander," Tank's voice was barely a whisper, "this whole thing stinks. How did he know so much about our operation?" Mitchell had been asking herself the same question. The level of intelligence Kasim had displayed suggested access to classified information that should have been available to only a handful of people. Either their operational security had been compromised from the beginning, or someone with the highest clearances was feeding information to the enemy. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one smaller but showing evidence of recent use. Sleeping bags, food containers, and ammunition were stacked against the walls. This had been a staging area for some kind of operation, though whether offensive or defensive remained unclear. Prophet checked his equipment, hoping to re-establish communications with their base. "Still nothing, Commander. Complete radio silence." They pressed forward through a series of interconnected chambers, each one carved from living rock with the same intricate patterns they had seen earlier. The ancient symbols seemed to tell a story, though none of them possessed the knowledge to interpret their meaning. This place was old, far older than the modern conflict that had brought them here. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the mountain, muffled by tons of rock but still clearly audible. Whatever was happening in the chamber they had vacated, it involved significant amounts of firepower. Mitchell wondered if Kasim had survived his promised conversation, or if his usefulness to whoever was orchestrating this elaborate charade had come to an end. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, they reached a chamber with natural light filtering down from above. The promised exit was there, a narrow chimney leading up to the mountain's north face. But standing between them and freedom was a figure that made Mitchell's blood run cold. Major William Harrison of Army Intelligence stood in the chamber's center, his sidearm drawn and pointed in their direction. Behind him, 2 soldiers in unmarked fatigues maintained defensive positions, their weapons trained on the tunnel entrance. "Hello, Sarah," Harrison said, using her first name with a familiarity that spoke of shared history. "I was wondering when you'd get here." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in Mitchell's mind, forming a picture that was far worse than anything she had imagined. Harrison had been her intelligence contact for the operation, the source of the information that had led them to Kasim's compound. He had known their routes, their timing, their extraction plans. "Bill," she said carefully, her weapon still holstered but her hand resting near the grip. "What's going on here?" "Something that's been in the works for a very long time," he replied. "Something that required exactly the right bait to flush out exactly the right fish." Behind her, Mitchell could sense her team's readiness to fight. Tank's hand was already moving toward his weapon while Spider was calculating angles and cover positions. But she knew that any shooting in this confined space would likely result in casualties they couldn't afford. "You set us up," she said, stating the obvious while buying time to think. "I set up an operation to identify and eliminate a security breach that was costing American lives. You and your team just happened to be the mechanism I needed to make it work." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Harrison was claiming that their mission had been designed not to capture Kasim, but to expose someone else entirely. They had been unwitting participants in an internal security operation that had placed them in mortal danger. "Who?" she asked simply. "Someone with access to the highest levels of special operations planning. Someone who's been feeding target locations and operational details to enemy forces. Someone who needed to be given information so sensitive and specific that they couldn't resist using it." The radio in Prophet's pack suddenly crackled to life. A voice Mitchell recognized as their operational commander came through clearly, ordering immediate extraction from coordinates that matched their current position. But the transmission was being broadcast on a frequency that enemy forces would certainly be monitoring. "There's your leak," Harrison said, holstering his sidearm. "Someone just ordered your rescue using a compromised communication channel. By tomorrow, every hostile force in this province will know exactly where this exit is located." Mitchell felt the weight of betrayal settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Someone she trusted, someone with authority over her operations, had been systematically compromising missions and getting American servicemen killed. The realization that her own team had been used as bait in an elaborate counterintelligence operation was almost more than she could process. But even as the truth became clear, new questions emerged. If Harrison had identified the leak, why was he here personally? Why hadn't this been handled through normal security channels? And, most importantly, what did he need from her and her team that couldn't be accomplished through official means? "What happens now?" she asked. Harrison's smile was grim. "Now we disappear for a while. Long enough for certain people to believe you're dead. Long enough for them to make mistakes that will confirm what we already know." The sound of approaching helicopters echoed down the chimney from above, but whether they carried rescue or further danger remained to be seen. Mitchell realized that her ordeal was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. 72 hours had passed since the world believed Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell and her team had died in the mountains of Afghanistan. The official report filed by Major Harrison described a catastrophic cave-in during pursuit of a high-value target, with no survivors recovered and no bodies found. The memorial service had already been scheduled, but Mitchell was very much alive, hidden in a safe house 300 kilometers from the cave complex where her supposed death had occurred. The building was nondescript, blending seamlessly into the urban landscape of a city whose name she had been told to forget. Harrison had explained that for the operation to succeed, Certain people needed to believe completely in their deaths. Tank paced the small room like a caged animal, his frustration evident in every movement. Being officially dead while very much alive created a unique kind of psychological pressure. His wife believed she was a widow. His children thought their father was never coming home. The weight of that deception was almost unbearable. "How much longer?" he asked for the 100th time. Harrison looked up from the electronic equipment that filled one corner of the room. "As long as it takes. We get one chance to expose the leak, and if we blow it, a lot more people die." Through the safe house windows, the city went about its daily business, unaware that a complex counterintelligence operation was unfolding in their midst. Mitchell watched pedestrians on the street below, envying their simple concerns and straightforward lives. She had signed up to fight enemies of her country, not to play elaborate games of deception against people she had trusted. Prophet monitored multiple communication channels, listening for any indication that their supposed deaths were being questioned. So far, the deception was holding. Condolences had poured in from around the world, tributes to fallen heroes who had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country. "Commander," Prophet said quietly, "there's chatter on the operational frequencies. Someone's requesting detailed casualty reports from the cave operation." Harrison moved to Prophet's equipment, studying the intercepted transmissions. "Time frame?" "Request came in 6 hours ago. Reply was delayed pending investigation of the site." "Good. That gives us the opening we need." Harrison turned to Mitchell, his expression grim. "The leak is getting impatient. Your supposed death has created an intelligence vacuum that they're trying to fill. When they push too hard for information they shouldn't want, we'll have them." Spider cleaned his rifle with mechanical precision, the familiar ritual providing comfort in an increasingly surreal situation. He had joined the SEALs to fight clear enemies with obvious objectives. This shadow war of deception and manipulation went against every instinct he had developed as a warrior. "What if you're wrong?" he asked Harrison. "What if the leak decides to lie low instead of taking the bait? Then we've bought ourselves time to pursue other options." "But I don't think that's going to happen. The information networks that have been compromised are too valuable to abandon. Someone is making significant money by selling American lives, and greed always wins over caution in the end." Torch sat in the corner, surrounded by technical manuals and electronic components. Harrison had tasked him with building specialized equipment that would be needed for the final phase of their operation. The devices he was constructing would allow them to trace communications back to their source, identifying not just the leak, but the entire network of people involved in selling classified information. "How many people are we talking about?" Mitchell asked. "Unknown, but probably more than one. This level of intelligence compromise suggests a coordinated effort, possibly involving personnel at multiple levels of command. Someone feeds information to a contact, who passes it through cutouts until it reaches people who are actively trying to kill American soldiers." The implications were staggering. If Harrison was correct, they were dealing with a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. People who had sworn oaths to defend the Constitution were systematically betraying that trust for financial gain. "Why us?" Tank asked. "Why use my team as bait?" Harrison's answer was brutally honest. "Because you're the best at what you do, and because your operational profile made you the perfect target for intelligence gathering. Someone feeding information about SEAL Team 6 operations would have access to exactly the kind of intelligence that enemy forces would pay premium prices to obtain." Mitchell felt a cold anger building in her chest. Her team hadn't just been betrayed by faceless conspirators. They had been specifically chosen because their skills and reputation made them valuable targets. Someone had deliberately put them in harm's way to advance a larger scheme. Prophet's equipment suddenly burst to life with urgent transmissions. "Commander, I'm picking up multiple communications referring to casualty verification requests. Someone is definitely pushing for detailed information about our supposed deaths." Harrison studied the intercepts, his expression growing more focused. "Pattern suggests the requests are coming from someone with legitimate access to casualty data. They're not trying to hack the system. They're using proper channels but asking for information they shouldn't need. Can you trace the source?" "Working on it. But whoever this is, they're being careful. The requests are being routed through normal administrative channels, making them look routine. The waiting was the hardest part. Mitchell's entire career had been built on direct action. on confronting problems head-on with overwhelming force and superior tactics. This passive observation went against every instinct she had developed as a warrior. But she understood that some battles could only be won through patience and careful planning. On the fourth day, their patience was rewarded. Prophet's voice cut through the safe house like a knife. Got something. Communication requesting detailed operational reports from the cave mission, including weapon serial numbers and equipment manifests. Harrison was beside him instantly, studying the intercept. That's way too specific for routine administrative purposes. Equipment manifests aren't included in standard casualty reports. Source: signal is being bounced through multiple relays, but I think I can track it back to the origin. As Prophet worked to trace the communication, Harrison explained why the request was so significant. Equipment manifests would tell someone exactly what kind of gear we carry, how our teams are equipped, what our capabilities are. That's operational intelligence worth a fortune to the right buyer. Mitchell felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. They're not just selling target locations, they're providing detailed intelligence about our capabilities, our equipment, our tactics. Exactly. And that information has been used to plan ambushes and attacks specifically designed to counter our advantages. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. Someone hadn't just leaked a few mission details, they had systematically compromised American special operations capabilities, providing enemies with the information they needed to develop effective countermeasures. Prophet looked up from his equipment, his face pale. I've got the source. Signal originated from Norfolk Naval Station, Communication Center building. The silence that followed was deafening. Norfolk Naval Station was home to some of the most sensitive military communications in the world. It housed operational planning centers, intelligence fusion facilities, and command structures that coordinated special operations across multiple theaters. That narrows it down to about 300 possible suspects, Harrison said grimly. But it confirms what we suspected. This is coming from inside our own command structure. Tank cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the tense atmosphere. So what's the plan? We can't exactly storm Norfolk Naval Station. Harrison's smile was predatory. We don't need to storm anything. We're going to give our leak exactly what they want. Detailed operational intelligence that's too tempting to resist and too specific to ignore. Over the next 6 hours, Harrison outlined an elaborate deception that would require Mitchell and her team to essentially resurrect themselves from the dead. The plan involved staged communications, fabricated intelligence reports, and a level of operational complexity that made their original mission seem simple by comparison. The key is making them believe they're getting access to genuine intelligence about our next operation, Harrison explained. Something so valuable that they'll break operational security to pass it along quickly. Mitchell studied the plan, noting potential weaknesses and variables that could derail the entire operation. What if they smell a trap? Then we've lost nothing but time. But I don't think they will. Greed has made them sloppy, and success has made them overconfident. The staged intelligence would describe a fictional operation targeting a high-value asset in Syria. The details would be specific enough to seem genuine, valuable enough to demand immediate transmission to enemy contacts, and unique enough to serve as a fingerprint that would identify exactly who was responsible for the leak. How do we know they'll take the bait? Spider asked. Because the target we're describing is someone they've been trying to locate for months, someone whose capture would be worth millions to various interested parties. Prophet began preparing the technical equipment they would need to monitor communications and track the flow of information once their false intelligence entered the system. The plan required split-second timing and coordination across multiple locations. What about extraction? Torch asked. Once we spring the trap, whoever's responsible is going to know they've been burned. That's where it gets interesting, Harrison replied. We're not just going to identify the leak, we're going to arrest them in the act of transmitting classified information to enemy agents. The operation would require Mitchell and her team to return to active duty without revealing they were still alive. They would be inserted into the normal operational planning cycle, given access to the false intelligence, and then monitor who attempted to compromise that information. Basically, we become ghosts haunting our own command structure, Mitchell summarized. Exactly. And ghosts can see things that living people miss. The transformation from officially dead to officially alive required extensive coordination with personnel who were cleared for the actual operation. Mitchell's team would be reintegrated into active status under classified circumstances that would be explained only to essential personnel. 2 days later, Mitchell found herself walking through the corridors of Norfolk Naval Station, officially resurrected from the dead. Her team flanked her, their presence creating ripples of shock among personnel who had attended their memorial services less than a week earlier. The false intelligence was distributed through normal channels, marked with classification levels that ensured it would reach the appropriate personnel. But hidden within the standard operational data were unique identifiers that would allow them to track exactly who accessed the information and when. "How long do we wait?" Tank asked as they settled into a temporary operations center. "Not long," Harrison replied, monitoring communication intercepts. "If our analysis is correct, someone will attempt to transmit this information within 12 hours. Prophet's equipment was more sophisticated than anything Mitchell had seen before, capable of monitoring multiple communication channels simultaneously while tracking the flow of information through various networks. The technology was clearly experimental, probably developed specifically for this kind of counterintelligence work. "Contact," Prophet announced suddenly. "Someone's accessing the Syrian operation files." Harrison studied the data flowing across Prophet's screens. Timestamp shows access at 21:47 hours. Source terminal is located in Building 7, 3rd floor. "That's intelligence analysis," Mitchell observed. "Could be routine review." "Maybe, but let's see what they do with the information." They didn't have to wait long. Within 30 minutes, Prophet detected outgoing communications that contained portions of the false intelligence. The transmission was encrypted and routed through multiple relays, but the technical signatures were unmistakable. "Got 'em," Harrison said with satisfaction. "Now we find out who they're talking to." The next phase of the operation required careful coordination with FBI counterintelligence teams who would handle the actual arrests. Mitchell's role was officially over, but she insisted on being present when the leak was finally identified. "Personal privilege," she told Harrison. "Someone sold out my team. I want to look them in the eye when they're arrested." The technical analysis took 6 hours, tracing the communication through a complex network of cutouts and relays that eventually led to known enemy intelligence operatives. The sophistication of the network confirmed that they were dealing with a well-established espionage operation. At 0630 hours, FBI agents arrested Commander Patricia Wells of Naval Intelligence as she arrived for work at Norfolk Naval Station. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Recorded communications, financial records showing unexplained deposits, and technical analysis proving she had transmitted classified information to enemy agents. Mitchell watched the arrest through a one-way window, studying the face of the woman who had betrayed her team and caused the deaths of unknown numbers of American servicemen. Wells looked ordinary, unremarkable, like someone you might pass on the street without a second glance. "Why?" Mitchell asked Harrison. "Money, mostly. Financial analysis shows she was being paid approximately $50,000 per month for classified information. But there might have been other factors. Pressure, blackmail, ideological conversion. We'll know more after interrogation." Tank stood beside Mitchell, his expression grim. "All those good people died because she wanted a bigger bank account." The scope of Wells's betrayal became clear over the following days. She had compromised dozens of operations, leaked the locations of forward operating bases, and provided tactical intelligence that had been used to plan attacks against American forces. The damage assessment would take months to complete. But for Mitchell and her team, the operation was over. They were officially alive again, with new identities and relocated assignments that would keep them away from anyone who might have worked with Wells. The price of survival was anonymity, the loss of their previous lives and relationships. "What happens to our families?" Tank asked during their final briefing. "They'll be told the truth eventually," Harrison replied. "But for now, your deaths remain official. It's the only way to ensure your safety and the security of ongoing investigations." Mitchell understood the necessity, but that didn't make it easier to accept. She would have to rebuild her life from scratch, establish new relationships, create a new identity. The woman who had led SEAL Team 6 into the mountains of Afghanistan was officially dead, buried in a grave that would never hold her body. 6 months later, Mitchell walked through a farmer's market in small-town America, her appearance subtly altered by civilian clothes and a different hairstyle. To anyone watching, she was just another woman enjoying a Saturday morning among the produce stalls and craft vendors. But she carried scars that would never fully heal, memories of betrayal that would never fade. She had learned that the most dangerous enemies weren't always the ones shooting at you from across a battlefield. Sometimes they were sitting right beside you in briefing rooms, wearing the same uniform, speaking the same oath. The official records would always show that Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell died in a cave-in while pursuing a terrorist in the mountains of Afghanistan. Her medals would gather dust in a display case somewhere. Her name would be carved on a memorial wall, and her sacrifice would be honored by people who would never know the full truth. But she was alive, hidden in plain sight, carrying secrets that could never be shared. The SEALs had believed their commander was lost forever in the shadows of those ancient mountains. They were wrong. She had emerged from those shadows as someone new, someone different, someone who understood that the war she had sworn to fight was more complex and more personal than she had ever imagined. The ghost had become real again, but the woman who bore that reality was someone her old team would no longer recognize. She had been reborn in darkness and betrayal, forged anew in the fires of deception and survival. She was no longer the commander her SEALs had followed into battle, but she was something perhaps more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. And in the shadows where truth and lies blended like smoke, where loyalty and betrayal wore the same face, Sarah Mitchell had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the only way to emerge from darkness is to become part of it, to disappear so completely that when you finally step back into the light, the world believes it's seeing a ghost. But ghosts, as her enemies were about to learn, could be far more dangerous than the living had ever been.